When growing orchids indoors, you need to think about things like what kind of light do I need to supplement if my house does not have natural light in abundance? How long do I keep these artificial lights on? How do I know it's the right intensity? What is PAR, lumens, CRI, foot candles? How far away do I keep my orchids from these lights? And what are the best lights to use? In this video, I'm going to go over the different types of terms that you need to know when choosing the correct light for your orchid. And I'm going to give you 4 solutions or possibilities that you can choose from to best provide for your orchid. Hi, I'm Amanda Matthews and thank you for watching this video at Orchideria. When I lived overseas, I grew all my orchids outdoors, so I didn't need to provide artificial lighting. But once I moved back to Kansas, I realized that the house that I chose didn't have any good natural lighting for my orchids. My east-facing window was right up next to my neighbor, so I had to provide artificial lighting, and I didn't know how to grow orchids indoors, and that's when I started my research. I had to provide the right lighting, the right humidity, the watering, everything was now provided by me and not nature. When orchids grow outdoors, they get a full spectrum of sunlight, which is visible and non-visible. When light companies saw the potential for selling light bulbs to orchid hobbyists and other indoor gardening hobbyists, they did research and realized that there were 2 colors that influence plant growth the most. The first color is blue, which is vegetative growth. The second is a red wavelength, which will produce a flower spike, which the plants naturally absorb more when they are in a flowering state. So these electrical companies that produced light bulbs, they produce these 2 wavelengths. That's why you'll see red and blue lights, but we all know from art class that when you mix red and blue, they get this purpley tinge color. Are those good for your orchids? Yes, they are. But in nature, do orchids only get red and blue? No, those are the colors they absorb the most, so that's what they're going to use the most. But they also use all the other colors in between. So when you provide these purple lights, the orchids will react well. It's not that they won't, but they are missing some of that full light spectrum that natural light will provide. With a little more research, the light companies came to find out that the hobbyists were moving away from these lights, so they produced a light called a LED light. The advantage of the LED light, and I will go into more detail about this in the video, is that they don't produce heat. If you have a light bulb that is converting energy to light and not just energy to light and heat, the cost will go significantly down. The cost will go significantly down. Let's start with one question, which is how much light do orchids need? When you're growing them indoors, first you'll need to know that there are different types of orchids. Some will need more light, others will need less light, but you can aim for, at the beginning, during winter, they'll need from 8 to 12 hours of light a day. During summer, they can do from 12 to 14 hours of light a day. The time that the orchids are under these lights is what's going to influence their interpretation of what season it is. The second thing we need to know about lighting is plants get their energy by converting the sunlight that hits on their leaves with the help of chlorophyll. So photosynthesis is what we're aiming at, because if we're providing artificial light, we want that light to hit the leaves and transform this light into energy with the use of with the aid of carbon dioxide and chlorophyll. So it makes sense to measure a light's capacity to induce this photosynthetic reaction in the plant. That is what PAR is called, P-A-R. PAR is photosynthetically active radiation. So it's the plant's capability of getting that light and transforming that light into energy. The range of measurements on PAR go from 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers. And this makes sense because on the light wave, that is what visible light measures at, 400 to 700 nanometers. Going back just a little bit, remember that the producers of light bulbs realized that plants will grow best with red and blue wavelengths. They do not absorb green. The red ranges between 620 and 750 nanometers. So it's on the highest range of your light bulb. The blue is a cooler range of light, ranging between 450 and 490 nanometers. And just remembering, the red will focus on flowering and budding, and the blue will focus on vegetative growth like leaves and roots. Another thing that is really important to know when we're talking about light conversion is the temperature. Now, we're used to Kelvin, but when it comes to plants and when it comes to how they absorb the light, the Kelvin is going to be measured on what this light looks like at different temperatures. We all know that the temperature can influence the color of the light depending on what it is. When we measure light according to the temperature, it's called CRI, which is Color Rendering Index. Just so you have a parameter, the sun is at 5,000 Kelvin and it has a CRI of 100. So 100 would be the maximum, like if our plants were outside during midday, during summer. And when we turn off all the lights in the middle of the night, or if we grow them indoors without any light at all, that would be closer to 0. So we have a parameter of CRI from 0 to 100. You are looking for lights. You want to get that number as close to 100 as possible. Fluorescent lights will range around 80 to 89 CRI. This part inverts a little bit because our natural thought is a little bit different, so bear with me here. A cool light leaning more toward the blue spectrum has a Kelvin of 5,000 to 6,000. Now, a red light, remember this is in terms of light, not in terms of temperature. That's why it confuses us. A red spectrum is about 2,700 Kelvin. So it's a little bit different. You know, we think of terms of Kelvin only in temperatures, but remember, it's how the light reacts in these temperatures. So in this sense, a warm growing orchid will want 2,700 Kelvin when you're looking for lights. A intermediate orchid will want 4,200 Kelvin, and a cool growing orchid will want 6,000. So it's kind of inverted in our minds because we always think of Kelvin as temperature. But if you can separate that temperature from how the light interacts with the temperature, then you'll get it. So keep those parameters in mind. Foot candles is the next term that we're going to talk about. And foot candles is really neat because imagine you have one candle and it's in a totally dark room and you light it. How far that light reaches in terms of feet is 1 foot candle. So if you have a light that can illuminate 2 foot candles, then you have a very weak light because it only illuminates 2 feet. For parameters, on a bright summer day in the middle of the afternoon, you can have 10,000 foot candles. Now, in terms of orchids, that is the number that you'll want to, you don't need to worry as much about PAR or CRI or any of those others. You need to worry about foot candles. if you have an orchid that is a low light orchid, like Phalaenopsis orchids, you don't need that much light. Now, as I said before, my house has no good windows. And if you know, those regrets that you only see after you move in. But so it's artificial lighting for me. So my Phalaenopsis orchids are on the lower shelf back here. They do not require that much light. That's why people can grow them on their east-facing windows, because that light comes in, and that morning light, it's only for a couple hours. It doesn't heat up. That's important. Remember, light and heat are different. The Phalaenopsis orchids do not require that much light. So in terms of foot candles, they will only want 1,000 to 1,200 foot candles. Medium light orchids, which are a step up, they will prefer to have longer light absorptions or brighter light. They can stay out a little bit longer. They will be between 2,000 and 3,200. Now these could be cattleyas, they could be dendrobiums, they could be other orchids like that. Highlight orchids, remember, highlight orchids still do not like to be in full sun in the afternoon. Do not keep them outside all day. Sunburn the leaves, you'll sunburn the whole flower and it will die. It also will overreact to the heat that it's getting. Highlight orchids will range in between 3,000 foot candles. So foot candles are what you really need to know about lighting. To convert foot candles to lumens, for math people, 1 foot candle is 10,764 lux, or 10 lumens per square meter, if you like the math. So I know this was very technical, but the best way, and I'll give you a little secret here, the best way to realize if your orchid is getting enough light, it's going to tell you, look at the leaves of your orchid. If you have a Phalaenopsis orchid, if it's dark green, it's not getting enough light. Cattleya orchids will be a little lighter, a little yellower green, and they're happy with that. It's usually like a little sick color, but that's the color they're happy with. If you have these dark, rich green, broccoli color leaves, then your orchid's not getting enough light. Another way to tell of foot candles, if you put your hand in between here's the light source and here's your orchid leaf. If you put your hand and you can see the exact outline of your hand, you're in a high light situation. If you back your light back up and you can see a slight outline of your hand and it's blurry, but you can still tell that the shadow is there, then you're at the right in between low light and warm light orchids. So that's a good measure if you don't have it. Most smartphones will have apps that can measure the lighting of your orchid. Of course, these are not as professional, but it will give you some idea of what the light range is. This is a great tool to have because when we use our cameras, the camera lens already adjusts to how much light is in that surrounding. So it's a feature that's already built into your camera. The apps just read that and will tell you what the light is around you, but don't trust them. The other thing that's really important to know is there are 4 types of lights. There are fluorescent, and I have to read the list here because my memory is done. Fluorescent, CFL, which is compact fluorescent lamps, HID, high intensity discharge, and LED grow lights. So there's these 4. The first one is the light bulb, you know, the bing idea lamp, and don't use it. Why? Because first, that light is going to not only transform to light, but it's also going to transform into heat. So if you put a high light orchid right by the lamp, it's not only going to get the light, it's going to get heat, and it's going to sunburn that orchid. It also has to be replaced every 3 to 5 months. The second one, CFL, compact fluorescent lamps. So if you're just starting out with orchids and you don't want to spend a lot of money, you can get 2 fluorescent bulbs and put 2 per shelf. When you install your lights, you should have between 4 and 12 inches from the light to the top of the plant. Now remember, top of the plant is not the leaf, it's right here. That's out of the video. But because this part is going to be almost touching the light. So make sure that this isn't an orchid, but imagine if it was. So if your orchid is here, you're going to install your lamp so it's 4 to 12 inches from that light. If your plant shelf is extremely wide, wider than 22 inches, then that light is not going to cover the front of the shelf. It's going to taper off. The strongest light is right directly underneath it, and then it gets less as it moves out. So if you have highlight orchids, put them right on the middle of your shelf and move the lower light orchids out to the front or to the back of your shelf. The one trick with using fluorescent lights is you'll have to mix and match the red and the blue, the warm and the cool lights. You can find those in stores, and it will tell you on there which is the red and which is the blue. So every once in a while, trade those out to get a good balance for your orchids. And if your orchids are in bloom, remember, just keep the ones that are red and the blue and which ones go with which. But don't take, all the red away. Always keep both on there and just switch them out regularly. Go with a normal fluorescent light, which is 45 to 60 watts. If you have a small collection of orchids, that's, 5, 10. If you have more than that, go with 250 watts. The problem with CFL, compact fluorescent lights, is that you'll need to mix and match the red and the blue, which I said before. The other problem is the cost of these. At first we think, wow, 2 lights, that can't cost as much. You'll be trading them out every 1.8 years, so this cost can be a little higher. Maintenance, there's not that much. You do need to wipe the bulbs down every once in a while, and lots of people forget to do that because if there's dust on them, they won't be giving off the right amount of light. And remember, the compact fluorescent lights will not give all the lighting that your orchid needs. High intensity discharge lights, or HID. There are 3 types of HID light bulbs, and they are mercury vapor, high pressure sodium, and metal halide. Now the problem with, and I'm going to jump straight into the problem because I don't want to talk a lot about a light that isn't going to benefit your orchid. The problem with these is the heat. The HID lights will produce tons of heat, and they will sunburn your orchids and will cause heat damage to your leaf. They also raise your energy bill. If you really want to use an HID light, then you'll pick one that is 250 watts. And keep it about a foot above your orchid. If it's still too strong, move it 2 feet or 3 feet. With the 400 watt bulb, you can keep it almost at the ceiling, and you can cover a good portion of your orchids with that. And the problem again with these, you'll have to change them out every 2 years. The orchids that will prefer an HID are the highlight orchids because they also tend, be careful with this, and don't quote me because lots of people will say, oh, you said this, and then listen to what I'm going to say first. Most all orchids, when there are high temperatures, are also high light. So they'll like that extra heat. They'll like the higher temperature that these bulbs will produce. Do your research. Do not get a highlight orchid thinking it is also high temperature, because sometimes they're not. So most all are. Got me? And the 4th option for lighting are LEDs, which I love. LEDs provide the full light spectrum, and they're not purple, and they won't raise your energy bill, and they do not heat up. So it's just, like they finally made a light that is perfect for orchids. that is the LED light full spectrum. Do not buy a LED light that is not full spectrum. How long do LED lights last? More than a decade. So this light I have up here, I don't have to change that for another 10 years. So that is why it is so cost effective. I mean, you purchase it once and you're home free. It is a little expensive in the beginning, but add all up those, add 2 fluorescent light bulbs every year, or add an incandescent light every 5 months. That's more expensive. Trust me. If you do want to know what light I used on this setup, you can go to my webpage at Orchideria, and I explain a little bit and can point you to where I bought it. I was completely satisfied with mine, and I did get it at a discount, so it's really good. If this video answered any of your questions or provided some kind of value to you, please hit that like button. That means a lot to me. It means a lot so I can know that this video is the kind that you would like to see more of. And leave a comment so that we can interact and I can answer some of the questions you have. Or if you just want to say hi, it really means a lot because these videos do take a long time to make. But don't stop your orchid care here. I can suggest 2 more videos that will really enhance your knowledge about heating and lighting and everything that's related. And the first one is about heating pads, and you can watch that video right here. And during winter, we need to supplement the heat inside our homes, and a heating pad is a good idea. The second one down here talks about temperatures and what is the right temperature for each orchid. So I thank you so much for watching this video, and happy cultivating!